very much, everybody. My name is Müller. I'm a PhD student at ETH Zurich, and my research is about how insurance companies can predict the revenue growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. These companies, often referred to as SMEs, are all companies that employ less than 250 employees, and that means I'm talking about like 99% of all companies. And by law, many of these companies are obliged to have commercial liability insurance. And that means insurance companies have large data sets of annual revenues of SMEs, and that has enabled me to do this kind of research. Now, you ask, why would an insurance company have an interest to predict the revenue growth of small and medium-sized enterprises? And I listed a few of the reasons why they would on the slide, but I also made a small video that I'd like to show you. And let's see if the sound works. There's a lot of competition among business insurance companies. This is because new competitors are entering the market, but also because of increased market transparency due to the emergence of comparison websites. In addition, insurance agents report that customers are negotiating premiums of their policies. So we ask, what can existing commercial insurance companies do to remain competitive? One thing we realized, if we would know which companies are growing, this would help us in many ways. With those insights, we can price the policies of growing customers competitively if necessary, and make sure we always win the contracts with the customers that will be very valuable in the future. Also, knowing which customers grow, we can direct our relationship efforts toward those valuable customers and make sure resources are used efficiently. Last but not least, if we are able to identify growing customers, we can also identify customers which are probably underinsured. This means the extra revenues of these businesses are up, and they should have told us, however, they did not. Of course, this means we didn't collect the premiums we should have, but it also means, in case of a claim, for example, because of a damage in the production line, the customer is not fully covered. The business customer expects us to pay for the claim, however, we are not legally bound to do so. It's a disaster for the business relationship. So, improved pricing, better resource allocation, and avoiding underinsurance are important reasons why any commercial insurance company should know which of their customers are growing. Of course, we could just call and ask, but isn't there a smarter way? Our business is very data intensive, and we already have information that can be analyzed and combined with other data sources. Doing this in a smart way, we can identify which customers are growing and which are not. To learn how businesses reveal information about their growth and how we can use it to inform our agents, click the link in the video description. Alright, great. This was the motivation for an insurance company to predict revenues for all kinds of SMEs. Today, however, I'm only going to talk about one industry sector, and that is tourism, and in particular, I'll show you how to predict the revenue growth of hotels using data from electronic word-of-mouth websites. Now, what I will show you in the next couple of slides is tell you a little bit what the tourism sector, why is it relevant in an insurance portfolio, what electronic mouth really is, where to extract these kind of data sources, how to extract these data sources, and how to feed that information into a growth prediction model, which eventually leads to my interim conclusion that an insurance company will be able to predict the revenue growth of hotels with about an accuracy of 70% in two-class classification. Now, obviously, that does not go without saying there are a few limitations, but I also provide ideas how to overcome these limitations. Now, one of the first things I did when I started investigating this topic is to really look which industries are relevant for insurance. Where do they collect most revenues? And what you see here in this ranking is an aggregated view of all the insured revenues split by industry. Now, this ranking, you see that restaurants, which, for example, is part of the tourism sector, ranks pretty high, and it also has a lot of observation. This is a downscape portfolio because obviously I can't really say much about the market share of a particular insurance. And in the last column here, you see the share in the overall portfolio. So restaurants alone make roughly 5% of all the revenues insured. And when I started investing sectors which are tourism related, I realized with the help of electronic word of mouth, I can not only predict, for example, restaurants, but I can also predict hotels which have restaurants, hotels themselves, or restaurants which have guest rooms,
but also things like bars, nightclubs, which I'll elaborate a little further. So what I ended up doing is building like a family of different prediction models that I could all feed with one single data source. And that obviously increased the application potential of the family of prediction models that I created. Today, as I said, I'll only talk about hotels, which is listed here as the 8th most revenue contributing industry for a commercial insurance company. And now I'll show you what data sources I used. By and large, the source I used is electronic word of mouth, and that is defined by literature as any positive or negative statement made by a customer about a product or a company. And if that information becomes digital, becomes searchable, moves on the internet, one refers to electronic word of mouth. And there's a bunch of literature and other research around word of mouth, and nowadays even electronic word of mouth, and some of them even tried in a quantitative way to put a connection between business performance of service industries and ratings and reviews. And a study which I really liked, because it's so close to my initial research idea, showed that increases in ratings and reviews actually had impact on the number of bookings. Now, this study was based on data from a booking platform such as Booking.com. What I also realized doing or researching the literature related to this topic, there is no study really investigating the actual business performance. So revenues reported by businesses themselves, but always some proxy has been used. And that kind of led me to my conclusion that this is a field I'd like to investigate. Now, what I want to stress, because I use terminology a lot, is when I talk about the ratings itself, I refer to the star value, which is kind of a reflector of kind of like the value for money, right? Stars in most cases. When I talk about the reviews, I talk about this number, normally in preferences behind the rating, and that means how many people had an opinion and bothered to share that online. Now, where to collect word of mouth? If you just Google your favorite hotel, you get already the list just from Google itself, and you see that even on the front page of Google, it shows you a source of electronic word of mouth. What you see is the name of the hotel, some characteristics, location obviously, as well as the rating and the number of reviews. Other data sources, for example, include Booking.com, TripAdvisor, and maybe one less known is the Swiss Hotel Association. It's a very complete database, and compared to the other data sources, this is self-reported. So when a hotel opens up, they're sent a questionnaire and asks if you want to join the Swiss Hotel Association. Then there are a lot of checks you can fill out and say you have a swimming pool, you have a spa, you're near a golf course, and so on. And they claim this makes their data source really, really accurate because the hotel owners themselves are the ones who maintain, check, and review the profile. Whereas compared to, let's say, TripAdvisor, this is all user-mined, self-reported from the people who use the service, and not always do managers actually check. And as you can see here, if this TripAdvisor profile, for example, says, gehört Ihnen dieses Unternehmen, well, that's a clear sign that nobody has claimed that business yet. And many, many businesses which are listed on TripAdvisor actually do have that claim, meaning that all the information there is not really verified by the hotel owners themselves. Now, if you think back of what I initially said when I mentioned the quote, which drove me to do this research, these changes and reviews and revenues, it means this information has to be somehow collected. And what I ended up doing is, first I called them and asked if they were willing to share that data, but that wasn't very successful, so I had to do something else. What I ended up using is a Google Chrome extension, which is a web scraper, which allowed me to, after installing, accessing it through developer tools, and then you build a logic where you highlight the containers into the HTML file that are interested for you. From there, you can really build a logic that goes or imitating human behavior and collecting the website. You can preview it and then export it to the CSV, to a CSV file that is machine readable. Now, referring back to the quote I showed you, what motivated me was this change in reviews and change in rating. Now, if you imagine how such a web scraper works, you also realize the only thing you get from the web scraper is just a static image of the website. So there's no history of changes in reviews and ratings. But that was what I was interested in. So what I ended up doing is I built a logic that goes for every hotel listed on TripAdvisor all the way back to like page 32 on their ratings and started collecting each individual entry. And from there, I extracted the timestamp and the rating itself. I aggregated that year by year, which then allowed me to calculate year-over-year changes in the ratings as well as the reviews, both in an absolute and relative way, which finally became kind of the major source for the prediction model. Now, one more source I'd like to highlight, just because it felt so compelling and not using it seemed to be a mistake, is data which is reported by the Swiss Federal Statistical Office called the accommodation statistic. This annual report shows by region how many hotels operate in one region as well as the number of tourist arrivals. So these are the slips you have to fill out when you go to a hotel, and they report that for statistical reasons. Now, if that's good or bad data, nobody really knows, but it's pretty large and complete over a longer period of time. And from there, I also calculated these annual changes, for example, annual changes in arrival by tourists, but also annual changes in the number of competing businesses in one region. Now, having collected all that data, I entered the phase of pre-processing, and I looked at a lot of correlations. First, to get rid of a lot of redundant information that I didn't really use for the models and was of no value, but also kind of to check if I'm on the right track. And one thing I realized pretty early is that it seemed valuable that revenues, annual revenues, and annual reviews seem to have a strong correlation. That, for data from Google as well as from TripAdvisor, not so much on Booking.com, which raised the question, who's really writing the reviews on Booking.com? And I guess nobody knows, but maybe it's also another reason, because Booking.com really turned out to be of no value in the data, and I ended up not using it at all. Now, for a little bit of better overview, I created this temporal view of the data sources that I used for my study, and I want to walk you through it. Now, what you see here is data, very static data I collected from the website is from this Swiss Hotel Association as well as from Google. The only pieces of information I used from those two websites are the characteristics of the hotel. So, for example, is it pet friendly, the golf courses nearby, opening hours, locations, these kind of things. I combined that data with this temporal view, the changes in ratings, the changes in reviews year after year, and a bunch of derived features from that website. Further, I added the supply and demand data from the Swiss Federal Statistical Office, so the SDS statistics, things like has competition in a certain region changed. And merging all this information together, I trained and built a model, which then eventually allowed me to do prediction on the future growth or shrinking of hotels. Now, obviously, my research does not happen in isolation, and my prediction time was a pretty special time for Swiss tourism in general, because the Swiss franc thing happened, the unpack, a lot of European tourists did not come to Switzerland, maybe for financial reasons, so I don't really know how much generalization my research brings because of this special period, but we'll come back to this later. Still, feeding all the information to a prediction model allowed me to correctly classify around 70% of the observations I had, and for the growing hotels, I even was able to correctly classify 79% of the hotels. And the model turned out to be significant. Now, you may ask, well, 70%, is that good or bad? Well, it's hard to give an answer on that one. If you just flip a coin, yeah, obviously it's better than that. And I really tried to come up with a business-related baseline that allowed me to compare that. And something that allowed me to actually make a comparison is look at provisional revenue. So that's the situation where an insurance agent talks to an SME, and the manager there says, well, I don't really know, the numbers are still within accounting, I can't really tell if we've been growing or shrinking, but we have to agree on a number. And that's the best comparison, or the best baseline I could really find in that domain. And that turned out that insurance agents are really, really good. They were able to correctly identify 86% that observation and say if business has been growing better. So what leads me to conclude, I don't think a predictive model of that kind will sooner or later replace agents or replace the talking of insurance agents to SMEs, but the agents don't have time to talk to all clients, especially the smaller ones often don't get enough attention that the numbers are updated correctly. And for there, I think there's opportunity to use a machine to do predictive, or to do predictions on the revenue growth of hotels. Now, I'm in nowhere near a position where I can say, like, this is what hotels need to do to grow or shrink. But still, out of curiosity, what I did is I plotted the most relevant features that I found in the data section, which eventually motivate others to do research on the causality, what drives business growth or not. Again, saying, only for the observation period that was available for me. The most relevant features that the model found to be of high importance was, for example, price. And looking at partial dependency plots, which then I created for each individual feature, showed that in the observation period, businesses that had room prices for less than 150 francs were in that period much more likely to grow. Also, I found a little bit of a clustering structure. So businesses located in the southern area of Switzerland were growing with a higher propensity than the ones in the north. And now, finally coming to one of the features that I mentioned in my working assumption, I also found that businesses that were able to improve their rating score on TripAdvisor over a period of 3 years were then much more likely to grow in a consecutive period. Similar, and now I'm referring to the fifth feature mentioned here, businesses which were able to have more reviews after comparing 1 year to another were also more likely to grow in the next year. Also, supply and demand, and this is with a little Swiss flag here, what the data suggested that businesses located in a region where there is no new competition had also a higher propensity to grow in the next consecutive years. And the last one, quickly to mention it, what I found is that businesses which had a wider variety of different options, so cheap and expensive rooms available on the website, had also a higher propensity to grow, similar to hotels which were yielding. Yielding means they beef up the prices when there's high demand, and they lower it when there is low demand. That being said, as I said, we are in a downturn, so especially things like price, for example, and the location, I don't think are generalizable items. And in order to investigate that, one would probably need a much longer study, do more samples. Obviously, as a PhD student, you're somewhat limited to the data you actually get to collect. That being said, I think there's worthwhile to investigate other data sources which are somewhat related. And what I've plotted here is, for example, Google Trends, which gives you in a quantitative format, because you can also export that as a CSV file, the relative frequency of a search term. Now, what you see here is Hotel Zermatt. And, there's a little bit of a downturn trend, and that would be interesting to correlate that with actual business performance. Similarly, literature found that one of the most competitive hotel markets is, for example, Las Vegas. They are really known for the yielding structure. They change prices a lot. When there's high demand, they skyrocket prices, but also if there's low demand, they just give the rooms away for really, really cheap. And if one will be able to collect that kind of pattern and learn from that and see if Swiss hotels are also applying similar behavior, that could become quite a valuable feature for revenue prediction. With these words, I'd like to close and look forward to your questions.